The first time, Scout refused to let little Lily near the upstairs room. The Richardsons thought it was just dog quirks. The second time, when he physically blocked the doorway, hackles raised. They were confused. But the third time, when the normally gentle golden retriever bared his teeth and actually growled at 8-year-old Lily, pulling her back by her sleeve, that's when they knew something was wrong. "He's never done this before," Sarah whispered to Thomas that night. "It's like he's protecting her from something." 3 weeks they'd lived in the old converted church. 3 weeks of Scout's growing agitation. 3 weeks of him sleeping outside Lily's bedroom door. None of them could have imagined what lay hidden behind the thin plaster wall, a child's desperate final words that had waited 15 years to be found. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Richardson family hadn't planned on moving to Pinewood, Oregon. Small towns weren't exactly on their radar, but circumstances had a way of rearranging priorities. The converted church on Maple Street came at a price they couldn't refuse, especially after Thomas had turned in his detective's badge following 20 years with the Portland Police Department. Thomas Richardson carried himself with the straight-backed posture of his former profession, though the lines around his eyes had deepened considerably in the past year. The case that broke him, 3 children gone missing. Only 2 found had hollowed something inside him. At 42, he'd chosen his family over the job that was slowly killing him. Sarah Richardson had supported her husband's decision wholeheartedly. As a child psychologist, she recognized burnout when she saw it, even if she'd been less quick to identify it in herself. Her practice had grown too large, the children's traumas too heavy to bear day after day. At 39, with her auburn hair now threaded with silver, she'd decided they all needed a fresh start. Their daughter Lily was the kind of child adults described as old-souled. At 8 years old, she spoke with a thoughtfulness that sometimes startled strangers. With her father's serious blue eyes and her mother's gentle smile, she moved through the world noticing things others missed, the sadness behind a cashier's smile, the loneliness in an old man's eyes. This sensitivity made her both deeply compassionate and unusually vulnerable. Then there was Scout, the 9-year-old golden retriever who'd once served with Oregon Search and Rescue. Thomas had brought him home 5 years earlier, after Scout had located a lost hiker against all odds. Retirement hadn't dimmed the dog's dedication. He'd simply transferred his protective instincts to Lily, becoming her constant shadow. What the Richardsons didn't know when they signed the paperwork was the history of their new home. They'd been told the previous owners had moved away suddenly, but not why. They hadn't heard about Claire Wilson, the 12-year-old who'd vanished from the house 15 years earlier, or how her stepfather, Jeffrey Wilson, still sat in a state prison, maintaining his innocence even as his parole hearing approached. They hadn't met Elaine Winters yet, the silver-haired woman who watched their moving truck from her porch across the street, who had lived in that exact spot for exactly 15 years, who was waiting for something only she understood. The Richardson family settled into a rhythm during their first week in Pinewood. Thomas tackled home repairs, while Sarah unpacked, transforming the strange space into something that felt like theirs. The converted church retained its high ceilings and stained glass windows, but previous owners had divided the main sanctuary into a spacious living area and added walls to create bedrooms upstairs where the choir loft had once been. It was the third bedroom, the smallest one at the end of the hall, that Scout first refused to enter. Sarah had designated it as a home office, dragging a desk inside while Thomas brought up boxes of books. Scout had followed them upstairs as usual, but stopped abruptly at the threshold, ears flattened against his head. "Come on, boy," Thomas encouraged, patting his thigh. Scout whined, backing away instead. Sarah laughed it off. "Maybe he doesn't like change. Remember how he sulked when we rearranged the living room last year?" Thomas nodded, but something about the dog's behavior nagged at him. Scout was trained better than that. The golden retriever had entered burning buildings during his service years. A dusty room shouldn't pose any challenge. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Thomas found himself drawn to the local newspaper's online archives. He couldn't explain the impulse that led him to search "Missing Child, Pinewood, Oregon," but the results made his blood run cold. The headline from 15 years ago was stark: "Local Girl Missing, Stepfather Questioned." The article described 12-year-old Claire Wilson's disappearance from her home, this home. The accompanying photo showed a smiling blonde girl standing in front of the church's distinctive red door. Thomas read through several follow-up articles, learning that Claire's stepfather, Jeffrey Wilson, had been convicted based on circumstantial evidence, despite no body ever being found. Thomas closed his laptop when Sarah entered the room. He'd tell her, of course, but not tonight. Not when they'd just started feeling comfortable in their new home. "Lily's talking about an imaginary friend," Sarah mentioned casually, curling beside him on the couch. "Says her name is Claire." Thomas felt his mouth go dry. "Claire? Says she met her upstairs. Isn't that sweet? I was worried the move might be hard on her. But she seems to be adjusting well." He forced a smile. "That's good." The next morning, Thomas noticed Scout shadowing Lily even more closely than usual. When the little girl headed toward the stairs, the dog pressed against her legs, subtly redirecting her toward the kitchen instead. By the fourth day, Scout's behavior had escalated. The first time Lily tried to enter the office upstairs, Scout placed himself bodily in the doorway. His posture wasn't aggressive. He simply stood firm, an immovable obstacle. "Scout, move," Lily commanded, her hands on her hips in an unconscious imitation of her mother. The dog didn't budge. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, coming up behind them with a basket of laundry. "Scout won't let me in," Lily complained. "I want to show Claire my books." Sarah frowned. "Honey, remember what we said about imaginary friends? They can be anywhere you want them to be." "But she says this is her special room," Lily insisted. That night, Sarah mentioned the incident to Thomas. "I'm a little concerned about how detailed this imaginary friend is becoming," she confessed. "Lily says Claire told her she's been alone for a long time and needs help." Thomas hesitated, then shared what he'd discovered about the previous occupants. Sarah's face paled as he spoke. "We need to talk to Lily," she said finally. "Gently. She's probably just picked up on something. Children are sensitive to history in ways we don't fully understand." "I know. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "I can't help thinking about Scout's behavior. He was trained to find people. Sarah, not just living people." Sarah shivered despite the warmth of the evening. Please, don't go there." The following morning brought a knock at their door. A silver-haired woman stood on their porch, holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Elaine Winters, from across the street. Thought you might enjoy some homemade muffins." As Thomas accepted the basket, he noticed her gaze drifting past him, scanning their home with an intensity that seemed inappropriate for a casual visit. "Lovely place, isn't it?" Elaine commented. "I've watched it change hands several times over the years." "Have you lived here long?" Sarah asked, joining Thomas at the door. 15 years next month," Elaine replied, something flashing behind her eyes. "Seems like yesterday sometimes." Before they could respond, Scout appeared in the hallway behind them, fixing Elaine with an alert, curious stare. The woman's composure faltered momentarily. "What a beautiful dog," she said, her voice slightly strained. "I've always found animals to be excellent judges of situations." After Elaine left, Thomas and Sarah exchanged puzzled looks. "That was strange," Sarah murmured. That afternoon, as rain pattered against the stained glass windows, Lily announced she was going upstairs to play. Thomas watched as Scout immediately rose from his spot by the fireplace to follow her. 10 minutes later, a sharp bark, followed by Lily's frustrated cry, brought both parents running to the second floor. They found Lily sitting cross-legged in the hallway outside the office door, pouting, while Scout stood guard in the doorway. "He won't let me in again," she complained, "and Claire is waiting for me." Thomas knelt beside his daughter. "Lily, honey, we need to talk about Claire. She's real," Lily interrupted with surprising conviction. "She's sad and scared, and she wants me to find something." Sarah joined them, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "What does she want you to find, sweetheart?" "She doesn't know," Lily said, her lower lip trembling. "She just knows it's important. She says it's behind the wall where the crying happened." Thomas and Sarah exchanged alarmed glances. Neither had mentioned anything about Claire Wilson to their daughter. That night, Scout refused to sleep in his usual spot at the foot of Thomas and Sarah's bed. Instead, he positioned himself outside Lily's room, his body pressed against her door as if standing guard. And in the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that had once belonged to a girl named Claire, the temperature dropped several degrees, though the autumn night was surprisingly mild. Thomas sat at the kitchen table long after Sarah had gone to bed, staring at the file he'd spread across the wooden surface. The local sheriff's office had been surprisingly cooperative when he'd identified himself as former law enforcement, providing copies of the Claire Wilson case with minimal questions. Now, surrounded by police reports, interview transcripts, and crime scene photos, Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through the old church windows. He hadn't told Sarah yet, hadn't found the right moment to explain his connection to this house, to this case. How could he tell her that Claire Wilson's disappearance wasn't just any missing child case, but one he had consulted on briefly 15 years ago when the Portland PD had been called in to assist, the case that had haunted the edges of his career like a shadow? The sound of nails clicking on hardwood announced Scout's arrival in the kitchen. The golden retriever approached, resting his graying muzzle on Thomas's knee. "You knew, didn't you?" Thomas whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Somehow you knew." Scout whined softly, his warm brown eyes holding Thomas's gaze with an intelligence that sometimes unnerved even those who'd worked with him. "I need to tell her," Thomas murmured. "I need to tell Sarah everything." Morning came too quickly. Thomas had barely slept, rehearsing his confession in his mind. He found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing Lily's lunch for school. "We need to talk," he said, pouring himself coffee. "About the house, about the Claire Wilson case." Sarah looked up, concerned by his tone. "What about it?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I worked on it. Briefly, 15 years ago, when Portland sent help to the local department." He watched the realization dawn on her face. "I didn't make the connection when we bought the place." The address was different back then. It was still listed as the Church of the Good Shepherd, not 1425 Maple Street. Sarah set down the knife she'd been using to spread peanut butter. "Why didn't you tell me when you found out? I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. But with Lily talking about Claire and Scout's behavior—" He trailed off, gesturing helplessly. "You think there's something still here," Sarah said quietly, her professional training keeping her voice steady, despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "Something connected to that girl." Thomas nodded reluctantly. "The case was never resolved to my satisfaction. Jeffrey Wilson was convicted. But—" He hesitated. "The evidence was circumstantial at best. No body was ever found. And now our daughter is talking to a girl named Claire." Sarah's voice had taken on the clinical detachment she used when discussing difficult cases, describing details she couldn't possibly know. "There's more," Thomas said, sliding the morning's newspaper across the counter. "Jeffrey Wilson is up for parole next month. After 15 years, he might walk free." Sarah scanned the small article on page 3. "Do you think he did it truly?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. That's what bothers me. His behavior afterward was suspicious. He changed his story several times about when he last saw Claire. But there was something off about the whole investigation." He paused. The local police chief at the time, Mike Hansen Sr., seemed unusually invested in pinning it on Wilson, rushed the case. Mike Hansen, like our current Sheriff Hansen, his son, Thomas confirmed, took over when his father retired about 10 years ago. Their conversation was interrupted by Scout's bark from upstairs, followed by Lily's voice rising in frustration. Sarah hurried toward the stairs, Thomas close behind. They found Lily standing outside the office door again, her small face flushed with annoyance while Scout blocked her path, his body tense but determined. "He won't let me in," Lily complained. "Claire's waiting for me." Thomas knelt beside his daughter. "Lily, we need to talk about Claire. I think—" "She's real," Lily insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "She shows me things. She showed me where she used to hide her treasures in the garden, and I found an old marble there, just like she said." Thomas and Sarah exchanged alarmed glances. They hadn't told Lily anything about the real Claire. "Sweetie," Sarah said gently, "when did Claire start talking to you?" "The first night," Lily said, wiping at her eyes. "She was crying in that room. I wanted to help her, but she said she can't leave until someone finds the truth." That afternoon, while Lily was at school, Thomas and Sarah examined the office more thoroughly. Scout watched from the doorway, refusing to enter despite Thomas's commands. 15 years of law enforcement, and I'm being ordered around by my dog," Thomas muttered, though his tone held more unease than annoyance. "He's trying to tell us something," Sarah said, running her hand along the baseboard. "Dogs don't behave this way without reason." "I know," Thomas sighed. "Scout was one of the best cadaver dogs in the state before he retired. If Claire was—" "Don't," Sarah said sharply. "There would have been evidence. Smells. Decomposition isn't something you can just hide." Thomas nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Unless someone knew how to conceal it. The stepfather, Jeffrey Wilson, worked as a mortician's assistant before his arrest." A knock at the front door interrupted their search. Thomas went downstairs to find Elaine Winters on their porch again, this time empty-handed. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her gaze moving past him into the house. "I saw your little girl get on the school bus and thought it might be a good time for us to chat." Thomas hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Something about the woman's demeanor suggested this wasn't a casual social call. Sarah joined them in the living room, offering Elaine tea, which she politely declined. "I've been watching your family," Elaine said without preamble, "particularly your dog's behavior." Thomas stiffened. "You've been watching us." Elaine's expression softened slightly, not in a sinister way. "Mr. Richardson, I've lived across from this house for 15 years. I've seen 3 families come and go, all leaving within a year. All of them reported strange occurrences." "What kind of occurrences?" Sarah asked, her professional curiosity engaged. "Cold spots, items moved, children who spoke of a sad girl named Claire." Elaine's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her cardigan. "None of them had a dog like yours, though." "How do you know about Claire Wilson?" Thomas asked, his detective instinct sharpening. A flash of something pain perhaps crossed Elaine's features. "Everyone in Pinewood knows about Claire. It was a tragedy that changed this town." "But you moved here right after it happened," Thomas noted. "Most people move away from tragedy, not toward it." Elaine met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes people have their reasons. Detective Richardson—" "I'm not a detective anymore," Thomas said automatically. "Aren't you—" Elaine rose to her feet. "Your dog is trying to tell you something. Detective, you should listen to him. And you should do it quickly before Jeffrey Wilson's parole hearing. The truth has waited 15 years. I'm not sure it can wait much longer." After she left, Sarah turned to Thomas, her face pale. "How did she know you were a detective? We haven't told anyone in town about your previous job." Thomas shook his head, uneasy. "I don't know. But she's right about one thing. Scout is trying to tell us something." That evening, as Thomas reviewed the case files again, he discovered something he'd missed. The initial search of the house had focused on the basement and garden, based on cadaver dogs' alerts. But the church renovation that transformed the building into a residence hadn't been completed until after Claire's disappearance. The upstairs bedrooms, including what was now their office, hadn't existed in their current form when Claire vanished. The dogs couldn't search what wasn't there. Thomas murmured to himself. He was interrupted by Scout's urgent barking from upstairs, running up the steps, 2 at a time. Thomas found the dog scratching frantically at the office door, which was now closed. "Lily," Thomas called, a spike of fear shooting through him. "I'm okay, Daddy," came her small voice from inside the room. "I just wanted to talk to Claire. She's showing me something important. Thomas tried the handle, finding it locked. Lily, open this door right now. I can't, she replied, her voice trembling. Claire says it's not safe. She says the bad man might hear us. What bad man? Lily, Thomas asked, his heart pounding. There's no one here but us. Not now, Lily said. But Claire says he comes back sometimes. The man with the shiny badge who hurt her. Thomas froze, his blood running cold. The man with the badge, not Jeffrey Wilson, who had never worked in law enforcement. Someone else. Behind him. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, her face questioning. Thomas motioned for her to be quiet, then turned back to the door. Lily, he said, keeping his voice calm. I need you to open this door right now. Scout and I need to come in and make sure you're safe. After a moment's hesitation, the lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal Lily standing in the center of the room, looking small and frightened. She's gone now, the little girl whispered. She got scared when I told her you were coming. Thomas gathered his daughter into his arms, holding her tightly as Scout circled the room, sniffing intently at the walls. The dog stopped at the far corner, whining and pawing at the baseboard. What's he doing? Sarah asked from the doorway, still unwilling to enter. Thomas set Lily down and moved to examine the spot Scout was indicating. I'm not sure, but I think he's found something. As he ran his fingers along the wall, Thomas felt a slight difference in the texture of the plaster. The wall here sounded hollow when he knocked on it, different from the solid thunk of the surrounding sections. There's something behind here, he said quietly, the detective in him awakening after a year of dormancy. Something Scout has been trying to warn us about all along. The next morning, Thomas contacted a contractor to examine the wall, but the earliest appointment available was 3 days away. End of October's always busy, the receptionist had explained apologetically. Everyone rushing to finish projects before winter sets in. Thomas hadn't pushed. Part of him the part that had seen too many crime scenes, too many grieving families, wasn't sure he wanted to know what lay behind that wall. But Scout's behavior left no room for denial. The dog had taken to sleeping in the hallway outside the office, his body positioned directly in front of the door like a furry sentinel. Sarah observed this new development with growing concern. As a child psychologist, she'd been trained to trust evidence over intuition, science over superstition. But watching Scout's unwavering vigilance stirred something primal in her, an ancient recognition that animals sometimes perceive dangers invisible to human senses. What do you think he's guarding against? She asked Thomas as they prepared dinner, keeping her voice low so Lily wouldn't overhear. Thomas sliced carrots with mechanical precision, his mind elsewhere. I'm not sure he's guarding against something. I think he's guarding something or someone. Claire, Sarah murmured, the name hanging between them like a delicate cobweb. Do you really think? I don't know what I think anymore, Thomas admitted. But I do know Scout was the best search and rescue dog in Oregon, if he's behaving this way. There's a reason. Upstairs, they could hear Lily's voice, speaking in the animated tones of a child engrossed in play. Occasionally, she would pause as if listening to a response. She's talking to Claire again, Sarah said, setting down her knife. Thomas, this isn't healthy. Whether Claire is, Something unexplainable? Or just Lily's imagination responding to a traumatic history she's somehow sensing? We need to address it. I know, Thomas sighed, rubbing his face wearily. I've requested the complete file on Claire's disappearance from my old contacts in Portland. It should arrive tomorrow. Maybe there's something there we've missed. That night, rain lashed against the windows, driven by an early autumn storm that had swept in from the Pacific. Thomas lay awake beside Sarah, listening to the wind howling around the eaves of the old church building. Something about the sound reminded him of a child crying, a soft whine from Scout, followed by the click of nails on hardwood, drew Thomas's attention. The dog appeared in the doorway, his outline barely visible in the darkness. He whined again, more insistently. "What is it?" "Boy," Thomas whispered. "Careful, not to wake Sarah." Scout turned and padded down the hallway, pausing to look back at Thomas. The message was clear. "Follow me." Thomas slipped out of bed and followed the golden retriever to Lily's room. The door was ajar, and Scout pushed it open with his nose, revealing Lily's empty bed. Alarm shot through Thomas like an electric current. "Lily," he called. No longer concerned about waking Sarah, Scout was already moving again, heading toward the office at the end of the hall. Unlike previous encounters, this time he didn't block the doorway, but pushed through, whining urgently. Thomas found Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor in the dim room, illuminated only by her small bedside lamp that she must have carried with her. She was facing the suspicious wall, talking softly. "Lily," Thomas said, relief flooding through him. "What are you doing up? It's the middle of the night." Lily turned, her small face solemn. "Claire was crying. She says the storm reminds her of that night." Thomas knelt beside his daughter, noting how Scout positioned himself between Lily and the wall. "What night, sweetheart?" "The night the man with the badge hurt her," Lily said simply. It was raining then, too. A floorboard creaked behind them as Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face tight with worry. "Thomas, Lily, what's going on?" "Claire was talking to me," Lily explained. "She showed me something." The little girl pointed to a spot near the baseboard. "There's a special hiding place there. She used to keep her treasures in it. But now there's something important inside." Thomas examined the section of wall Lily indicated, the same spot Scout had been pawing at earlier. Looking closer, he noticed a hairline crack in the plaster, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. "Let's all go back to bed," Sarah suggested, her tone carefully controlled. "We can talk about this in the morning." "But Claire needs help now," Lily protested. "She's been waiting so long, and she's scared of the storm." "Claire will be okay until morning," Thomas assured her, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. "Scout will stay up here and keep her company." As if understanding, Scout settled onto the floor, his eyes fixed on the wall. Lily reluctantly allowed herself to be led back to bed, extracting a promise from her parents that they would help Claire first thing tomorrow. The storm raged throughout the night, but by morning had settled into a steady, gloomy drizzle. Thomas called in sick to his new job at the town's hardware store, determined to investigate the wall without waiting for the contractor. While Sarah took Lily to school, Thomas gathered tools from the basement: a hammer, a utility knife, a small pry bar. Scout watched attentively as Thomas approached the suspicious section of wall, his tail giving a single wag of approval. "Here goes nothing," Thomas muttered, tapping the wall gently with the hammer to confirm the hollow sound he'd heard before. He was about to make the first cut into the plaster when a knock at the front door interrupted him. Sighing with frustration, he set down his tools and went downstairs. Sheriff Mike Hanson, Jr. stood on the porch, rain dripping from his uniform hat. At 40, he had the weathered look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. With the same square jaw and broad shoulders Thomas remembered from his father. "Mr. Richardson," the sheriff said with a polite nod. "Got a minute?" Thomas hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Hanson removed his hat, turning it in his hands as he glanced around the living room. "Just making my rounds, checking in on folks after the storm. Old buildings like this one can take a beating in high winds." "Everything seems fine," Thomas said, conscious of the tools he'd left upstairs. "We appreciate the concern," Hanson nodded, but made no move to leave. "Heard you were asking questions about the Claire Wilson case down at the station yesterday." Thomas maintained a neutral expression. "Just trying to understand the history of our new home. Seems like it made quite an impact on the town." "That it did," Hanson agreed, his eyes sharp despite his casual tone. "Terrible business. My father was chief back then, worked himself to exhaustion trying to get justice for that little girl." "By arresting Jeffrey Wilson," Thomas said carefully. "Evidence pointed that way," Hanson replied, a slight edge entering his voice. "Wilson was a troubled man with a history of anger issues. Claire had confided in her teacher about being afraid of him. But no body was ever found," Thomas pointed out. Hanson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Not all killers make that mistake, Mr. Richardson, especially ones with knowledge of mortuary practices." Before Thomas could respond, Scout appeared at the top of the stairs, watching the sheriff with unusual intensity. Hanson glanced up, his posture stiffening slightly. "Fine-looking dog," he commented, though his tone lacked warmth. "Golden Retriever, right? Former search and rescue," Thomas confirmed. "One of Oregon's best." Something flickered in Hanson's eyes, concern, perhaps, or calculation. "Well, I should get going. More houses to check on." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Word of advice, Mr. Richardson. Some cases are better left closed. Stirring up old memories doesn't do anyone any good, especially in a small town like Pinewood." After the sheriff left, Thomas returned upstairs to find Scout back in his position by the wall, more agitated than before. The dog whined and pawed at the baseboard, his message unmistakable hurry. Thomas had just picked up the utility knife when his phone rang. Sarah. "You need to come to the school," she said without preamble, her voice tight with tension. "There's been an incident with Lily." Thomas arrived at Pinewood Elementary 20 minutes later to find Sarah waiting in the principal's office with a subdued Lily. The principal, a thin woman with sympathetic eyes, explained that Lily had become upset during history class. "When Mrs. Bennett mentioned the town's founding," she said, "Lily became quite agitated, insisting that the former police chief was a bad man who hurt Claire. Given the sensitivity of that topic in our community, Mrs. Bennett thought it best to call you." "I was just telling the truth," Lily mumbled, staring at her shoes. "Claire showed me what happened." The drive home was quiet. Lily gazing out the window while Sarah and Thomas exchanged worried glances. When they arrived, Scout met them at the door, his entire body vibrating with nervous energy. "I'm going to take Lily upstairs for a nap," Sarah said quietly. "She's exhausted." "No," Lily cried, suddenly alert. "I need to help Claire. We promised." "Lily, honey," Thomas began, but the little girl was already running up the stairs, Scout close at her heels, close at. Thomas and Sarah followed, finding Lily in the office doorway, Scout standing beside her rather than blocking her path for once. The dog's behavior had shifted instead of preventing entry. He now seemed to be encouraging it. "See?" Lily said triumphantly. "Scout knows Claire needs our help." Thomas shared a look with Sarah, who gave a small, resigned nod. "Okay," he said, retrieving his tools from where he'd left them. "Let's see what's behind this wall." Working carefully, Thomas cut along the edges of the section Scout had identified, creating a rough rectangle about 2 feet square. The plaster was thin, newer than the surrounding wall, a patched job rather than original construction. It came away easily, revealing a small cavity in the wall framing. Scout whined with excitement as Thomas shone his flashlight into the space. There, wedged between 2 studs, was a metal box, old and tarnished, but intact. "Is that Claire's special hiding place?" Lily whispered, peering around Thomas's shoulder. "I think it might be," Thomas replied, carefully extracting the box. It was lighter than he expected, about the size of a hardcover book. The 3 of them, with Scout watching intently, gathered around the small desk as Thomas examined the box. It wasn't locked, merely latched, though years of disuse had made the mechanism stiff. With gentle pressure, it finally gave way. Inside lay a child's treasures, a friendship bracelet woven from colorful threads, a small notebook with a flowered cover, several polished stones, and a folded piece of paper sealed with a heart sticker. Beneath these items was a plastic bag containing what appeared to be a hair ribbon and something small that gleamed metallically in the light. Sarah gently unfolded the notebook, revealing childish handwriting in purple ink. "Dear Diary," she read softly. "Today I found the perfect hiding place for my special things. It's in the wall of my new room, where Mom won't find it. I can get to it by pushing the baseboard just right. I'm going to keep all my important stuff here." "That's Claire's diary," Lily said with certainty. "She told me about it." Thomas picked up the sealed letter, turning it over in his hands. The front bore a single word in the same purple ink, Mom. "Should we open it?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed. "It's evidence," Thomas replied automatically, then caught himself. But the case was closed 15 years ago. Jeffrey Wilson was convicted. "Claire wants us to open it," Lily insisted. "That's why she's been trying to show me where it is." Thomas carefully broke the heart sticker seal and unfolded the paper. The letter inside was written in the same childish hand as the diary, but the penmanship was shakier. The ink smudged in places, as if by tears. "Dear Mom," Thomas read aloud, his voice growing tight as he continued. "If you're reading this, something bad probably happened to me. I'm scared, Mom. Not of Jeffrey like you think, but of Chief Hansen. He comes to see me when you're at work. He says he's checking on me, but he touches me in ways that feel wrong. When I told him I was going to tell you, he got really mad. He said no one would believe me because he's the police chief and I'm just a kid. I'm writing this down in case something happens. Please believe me, Mom. It wasn't Jeffrey. It was the man with the badge. Love. Claire. Silence fell over the room as the implications of the letter sank in. Even Scout seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, pressing himself against Lily's legs as if to offer comfort. Chief Hansen, Sarah whispered. The current sheriff's father. Thomas nodded grimly, his mind racing through the case details he remembered, how the investigation had focused exclusively on Jeffrey Wilson from the beginning, how alternative suspects had been dismissed without thorough investigation, how the search of the house had seemingly been designed to avoid certain areas. We need to take this to the state police, he said finally. This changes everything about the case. What about Claire? Lily asked, her small voice breaking the tension. Will this help her? Thomas knelt beside his daughter, choosing his words carefully. This will help make sure the truth is known, sweetheart. That's what Claire wanted, wasn't it? Lily nodded solemnly. She says, thank you, she whispered. She's been waiting a long time for someone to find her letter. As Thomas stood to call his former colleagues in the state police, he noticed the plastic bag still sitting in the box. Taking a closer look, he realized the metallic object inside wasn't a child's trinket, as he'd first thought. It was a police badge pin, a miniature replica of the kind given as commemorative items to department family members, and caught in its clasp was a single gray hair. Thomas made 2 phone calls that afternoon, one to his former partner in Portland, Detective Marquez, and another to the Oregon State Police. Both conversations were tense, filled with careful language and the unspoken understanding that accusations against a former police chief, even a deceased one, would need substantial evidence. The state police agreed to send an investigator the following day, but made no promises beyond that. We need to secure the evidence, Thomas told Sarah after hanging up. And we need to be careful. If Sheriff Hansen gets wind of this before the state police arrive. Do you think he knows? Sarah interrupted, her voice low to keep Lily, who was drawing at the kitchen table, from overhearing. About his father. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. But the way he showed up this morning, right when I was about to open that wall, it feels like more than coincidence. Sarah glanced at the metal box now sitting on the counter. Claire's letter safely sealed in a Ziploc bag inside. Where should we keep it? With us, at all times. Thomas's expression was grim. I don't trust this town. Sarah, not anymore. As evening approached, the weather worsened again. The local news reported that a second, more powerful storm was moving in, with potential for power outages and road closures. Thomas checked their emergency supplies, flashlights, batteries, bottled water, while Sarah prepared a simple dinner that none of them had much appetite for. Scout seemed unusually restless, pacing between the front door and Lily's side, occasionally stopping to stare out the windows at the darkening sky. His behavior reminded Thomas of how search dogs sometimes acted when they sensed an approaching threat, alert to dangers humans couldn't yet perceive. Maybe we should leave, Sarah suggested as they washed dishes together, the wind beginning to howl around the eaves. Stay in a hotel in Portland until the state police have investigated. Thomas considered this. The roads might already be dangerous, and leaving suddenly might alert Sheriff Hansen that something's wrong. He dried a plate methodically. We're safer staying put. I still have my service weapon. We'll be fine. But as night fell and the storm intensified, Thomas's confidence wavered. The old church building creaked and groaned under the assault of wind and rain, strange noises echoing through its aging structure. Twice they lost power momentarily, the lights flickering before steadying again. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" Lily asked as Sarah tucked her in, her small face solemn in the glow of her bedside lamp. "I don't want to be alone." "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah agreed, helping Lily gather her pillow and favorite stuffed bear. "We'll have a family sleepover." Thomas was checking the locks one final time when headlights swept across their front windows. A vehicle had pulled into their driveway, a police cruiser. His hand moved instinctively to the small of his back where his gun would normally be holstered. Before remembering, it was upstairs in the lockbox beside their bed. "Sarah," he called quietly, "take Lily and go upstairs. Now." Sarah appeared in the hallway, immediately reading the tension in his posture. She nodded once, gathering Lily close. "Come on, honey. Let's go find Scout." Thomas watched them ascend the stairs before moving to the front door. Through the peephole, he could see Sheriff Hansen standing on their porch, rain plastering his uniform to his broad shoulders. The man knocked, the sound unnaturally loud against the backdrop of storm noise. Taking a deep breath, Thomas opened the door. "Sheriff, bit late for a social call." Hansen's face was grim, water streaming from the brim of his hat. "This isn't social. Richardson got reports of suspicious activity at this address. Someone called in concerned about a child in distress." Thomas's mind raced. No one had called for help, which meant this was a pretext. "Everything's fine here. Sheriff, my daughter was upset earlier today, but she's calmed down now." "Need to see for myself," Hansen replied, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Department policy. May I come in?" Thomas hesitated, weighing his options. Refusing would only escalate the situation. "Of course," he said, stepping aside, "but we were just heading to bed. The storm's got my daughter nervous." Hansen entered, removing his hat but not his rain jacket, water pooling on the hardwood floor beneath him. His eyes scanned the living room with the practiced efficiency of a career law enforcement officer. "Nice place. You folks settling in okay?" "We are," Thomas replied, keeping his tone casual while positioning himself between Hansen and the stairs. "Though we're still learning about the house's history." Something hardened in Hansen's expression. "History's a tricky thing, isn't it? People remember what they want to remember." He took a step toward the kitchen, his gaze falling on Claire's metal box still sitting on the counter. "What's that you got there?" Before Thomas could answer, a series of sharp barks erupted from upstairs, followed by the sound of running feet. Scout appeared at the top of the stairs, hackles raised, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. It was a sound Thomas had never heard from the normally gentle dog. Hansen's hand moved to his weapon. "Call off your dog, Richardson." "Scout, stay," Thomas commanded, though part of him wanted to let the dog charge. "He's protective of my family. Sheriff, maybe we should continue this conversation another time." "I don't think so," Hansen replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Not when I've got reason to believe you're interfering with an active investigation. What investigation would that be? Thomas asked, tension coiling in his muscles. The Claire Wilson case was closed 15 years ago. Your father made sure of that. Hanson's face flushed. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Thomas took a calculated risk. We found Claire's letter. Sheriff, we know what your father did to her. What happened the night she disappeared? For a moment, Hanson seemed genuinely confused, his brow furrowing. Then something shifted in his eyes, not guilt or anger, but fear. What letter? What are you talking about? The power chose that moment to fail completely, plunging the house into darkness save for the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. In the sudden blackness, Thomas heard Hanson's quick intake of breath, followed by the unmistakable sound of a weapon being drawn. Nobody move. Hanson's voice came from the darkness. This has gone far enough. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness as Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, the light illuminating her pale, determined face. Thomas, what's happening? Go back, Sarah, Thomas warned, trying to track Hanson's position by sound alone. Take Lily, and stay upstairs. I don't think so, Hanson said, his voice moving toward the stairs. Everyone's coming downstairs where I can see them. Now! Scout's growling intensified, and Thomas heard the dog's nails scrabbling on the hardwood as he positioned himself at the top of the stairs, a barrier between Hanson and Thomas's family. Sheriff, let's talk about this rationally, Thomas said, trying to de-escalate. Whatever you think is happening here, shut up, Hanson snapped. I know exactly what's happening. You people move in here, start digging into things that don't concern you, upsetting the whole town with your questions. Well, it stops tonight. A small voice came from upstairs. Daddy, I'm scared. Lily. Thomas's heart clenched. Everything's okay, sweetheart. Stay with Mom. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the room in stark white light. Thomas caught a glimpse of Hanson halfway to the stairs, gun in hand, his face a mask of determination. In that same instant, Thomas lunged, tackling the sheriff just as darkness fell again. They crashed to the floor, Hanson's weapon discharging with a deafening crack. The bullet splintered the wooden banister. Sarah screamed from upstairs, and Scout's barking reached a frenzied pitch. Thomas grappled with Hanson in the darkness. 20 years of police training guiding his movements. He managed to pin the sheriff's gun hand to the floor, using his weight to immobilize the larger man. Sarah, he shouted over the storm, get Lily out through the back. Go to Elaine's house. You're making a mistake. Hanson gasped beneath him. You don't understand what's happening. I understand perfectly, Thomas replied through gritted teeth. Your father killed Claire Wilson, and you've been covering for him all these years? No! Hanson's denial was surprisingly vehement. That's not... He bucked suddenly, throwing Thomas off balance and reversing their positions. The sheriff now loomed above him, a shadow in the darkness. You've got it all wrong. Another flash of lightning revealed Hanson's face inches from Thomas's own, his expression not triumphant, but desperate. My father didn't kill Claire, he said, his voice breaking. But he knew who did. He protected them, said it was for the good of the town. Before Thomas could process this, a blur of golden fur launched from the stairs. Scout. abandoning his post to protect his master, slammed into Hansen with the full force of his 70-pound body. The sheriff tumbled sideways, his gun skittering across the floor. Thomas scrambled to his feet, searching blindly for the weapon. Behind him, he could hear Scout and Hansen struggling, the dog's growls mingling with the sheriff's curses. His hand closed around the cold metal of the gun just as a beam of light swept through the front window's headlights, accompanied by the distinctive wail of police sirens. "Thomas," Sarah called from upstairs. "Someone's here." The front door burst open, admitting a gust of wind and rain along with two uniformed state troopers. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the chaotic scene, Thomas holding Hansen's gun. The sheriff pinned to the floor by Scout, who had the man's sleeve clamped firmly in his jaws. "Police, everyone freeze," one trooper shouted, weapon drawn. "Thomas Richardson." Thomas identified himself quickly. "Former Portland PD, that's Sheriff Hansen. He broke in and fired at us." He carefully set the gun down, raising his hands. "My wife and daughter are upstairs." The troopers moved with practiced efficiency, one securing Hansen while the other verified Thomas's identity. Scout released the sheriff's arm at Thomas's command but remained vigilant, his eyes never leaving Hansen. "Detective Marquez called us," the senior trooper explained as his partner handcuffed a subdued Hansen. "Said you might need immediate assistance based on new evidence in a cold case." Looks like he was right, as if summoned by the mention of evidence. Sarah appeared on the stairs, clutching Claire's metal box. Lily peered fearfully from behind her mother's legs, with only her wide eyes visible. "We found this," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "It contains a letter from Claire Wilson, written shortly before she disappeared. It implicates the former police chief, Sheriff Hansen's father." Hansen, now sitting handcuffed on the floor, looked up at Sarah with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read. "My father was a monster," he said quietly. "But he didn't kill Claire. He just helped cover it up." "Then who did?" Thomas demanded. Before Hansen could answer, Scout suddenly abandoned his watch over the sheriff. The dog raced to the front door, barking urgently at something outside in the storm. The senior trooper's flashlight beam swept across the front yard, catching a figure standing in the rain beside a parked car. The slight, silver-haired form of Elaine Winters, her face pale as death in the harsh light. "That's our neighbor," Thomas began, but Scout's behavior gave him pause. The golden retriever wasn't just alerting to Elaine's presence. He was displaying the same agitated behavior he'd shown upstairs in the office, the behavior of a search dog who had found what he was looking for. Understanding dawned on Thomas with horrifying clarity, just as Elaine raised something in her hand, the metallic glint of a revolver catching in the flashlight beam. "Get down!" Thomas shouted, lunging for Sarah and Lily as the first shot shattered the front window. Glass exploded inward as Elaine's shot pierced the window, sending crystalline shards flying across the living room floor. Thomas shielded Sarah and Lily with his body, feeling tiny fragments pelt his back as he pushed them toward the kitchen. "Stay down," he commanded, his protective instincts overriding everything else. The state troopers reacted with professional swiftness, one dragging Sheriff Hansen behind the sofa while the other took up position beside the door, weapon trained toward the broken window. "Oregon State Police!" the trooper shouted into the storm. "Drop your weapon!" Another shot answered him, the bullet embedding itself in the doorframe inches from the officer's head. Scout barked frantically, torn between protecting his family and responding to the threat outside. "Thomas!" Sarah gasped from beneath him, her arms wrapped tightly around a trembling Lily. "Why is Elaine shooting at us?" Thomas shook his head, mind racing to connect the pieces that had been scattered before him. Claire's letter, Sheriff Hanson's confession about his father, Scout's reaction to Elaine from the very beginning. Something was missing. Something crucial. "I need to get you two somewhere safe," he said, scanning the room for the best escape route. The kitchen led to a back door, but they'd be exposed crossing the open space. "The basement," Sarah suggested, her clinical mind still functioning despite the terror. "The old church maintenance tunnels. Remember, the realtor said they run beneath the entire building." Thomas nodded. The basement door was just a few feet away, partially concealed by the kitchen island. "On my count. We make for that door. Ready?" Sarah nodded, gathering Lily closer. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. They scuttled across the floor as another shot rang out, this one punching through the wall above their heads. Thomas wrenched open the basement door, ushering Sarah and Lily through before following, pulling the door shut behind them. The basement was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and old stone. Thomas fumbled for his phone, activating the flashlight function to reveal a steep staircase descending into darkness. "Down we go," he said, trying to keep his voice calm for Lily's sake. "Careful on the steps." They made their way down into the church's original basement, a cavernous space with stone walls and a dirt floor. Rusted pipes ran along the ceiling, and ancient support columns rose like silent sentinels in the gloom. At the far end, Thomas could just make out a narrow doorway, the entrance to the maintenance tunnels. "Why is Elaine trying to hurt us?" Lily whispered, her small voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "I thought she was nice." "I don't know, sweetheart," Thomas replied honestly. "But we're going to find out." Above them, muffled by the thick floor, came the sound of more gunshots, followed by shouting. Scout's barking had intensified, the sound carrying even through the layers of wood and stone. "Scout!" Lily cried, suddenly struggling in Sarah's arms. "We can't leave Scout up there." "He'll be okay," Thomas assured her, though his heart clenched at the thought of their loyal dog facing danger alone. "Scout is very brave and very smart." They reached the tunnel entrance, a low archway barely 5 feet high, leading into a narrow passageway that disappeared into darkness. Thomas played his light along the earthen walls, noting the crude construction. "These must date back to the original church construction," he murmured, "maybe even older." "Where do they lead?" Sarah asked, ducking to avoid hitting her head on the low ceiling. "The realtor said they connect to the old parish house, which would be—" Thomas oriented himself mentally. "That direction. About 50 yards away. It's been converted into a garage now." They moved carefully through the tunnel, the sounds from above growing fainter with each step. Thomas led the way, constantly checking for obstacles or weak spots in the aging structure. Sarah followed, carrying Lily despite the girl's insistence that she could walk. "Thomas," Sarah said after they'd gone about 30 feet, her voice hushed, "I think I understand what's happening. Elaine, she must be connected to Claire somehow. The timing of her arrival in town, her obsession with the house." Thomas nodded grimly. "I think you're right. And I think Sheriff Hansen knows exactly what that connection is. A new sound reached them, then a faint, scratching noise from behind, followed by the unmistakable whine of a dog in distress. Thomas swung his light back toward the tunnel entrance just as Scout's golden form appeared, squeezing through the narrow opening. "Scout!" Lily cried out in relief, finally breaking free from Sarah's arms to rush toward the dog. Thomas caught her before she could go far. "Wait, Lily, Scout might not be alone." But the dog was indeed alone, his fur matted with rain, and what Thomas realized with a jolt was blood along his right shoulder. Scout limped toward them, whining softly, his mission to find his family accomplished despite his injury. "He's hurt," Lily said, tears welling in her eyes as she knelt beside the golden retriever, gently touching his wounded shoulder. Thomas examined the injury quickly. "It's just a graze," he said, relief evident in his voice. "The bullet didn't go in. He'll be okay." Scout licked Lily's hand once, then turned to face the way they had come, a low growl building in his chest. His message was clear. Danger was following. "We need to keep moving," Thomas urged, helping Sarah to her feet. "The garage is our best bet." They continued down the tunnel, Scout limping alongside Lily, occasionally glancing back with alertness that belied his injury. The passage began to slope upward, and soon they could see a faint rectangle of lesser darkness ahead, another doorway. Thomas approached cautiously, listening for any sound from the other side, hearing nothing but the distant howl of the storm. He eased the old wooden door open, revealing the interior of what had indeed once been a parish house, now converted into a storage space adjacent to a small garage. His flashlight beam picked out garden tools hanging on the walls, old paint cans, and a dusty workbench. "We made it," Sarah breathed, setting Lily down at last. "What now?" "Now we get as far from here as possible," Thomas replied, moving toward the garage door. "There should be a side entrance that—" He froze as his light illuminated the center of the garage space. There, parked neatly, as if waiting for them, was Elaine's sedan. And leaning against it, arms crossed over her chest despite the revolver still clutched in one hand, was Elaine herself. "I thought you might use the tunnels," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Claire did, whenever she wanted to escape the house without her mother knowing. I showed her how." Thomas pushed Sarah and Lily behind him, acutely aware that his own weapon was still upstairs in their bedroom. Scout positioned himself in front of the family, his injured shoulder seemingly forgotten as he faced Elaine with bared teeth. "Who are you really?" "Elaine," Thomas asked, playing for time while he assessed their options. The only exit besides the tunnel was the main garage door, behind Elaine, and a small window high on the wall to his right, too small for an adult. Perhaps just big enough for Lily. "Isn't it obvious by now?" Elaine's smile was terrible in its sadness. "I'm Claire's mother. Her real mother. Her biological mother," Sarah said softly from behind Thomas. "You gave her up for adoption." Elaine's eyes flicked to Sarah, hardening slightly. "I was 16. My father, the great Chief Hansen, decided his unwed teenage daughter couldn't possibly keep her baby. It would ruin his reputation in this God-fearing town." The bitterness in her voice was ancient and deep. "So Claire went to the Wilsons. Good. church-going people with a nice house and a respectable business. But you found her again, Thomas guessed, inching subtly toward the workbench where he'd spotted a hammer among the tools. When she was 11, Elaine confirmed. I'd finally tracked her down after years of searching. I rented a house nearby, introduced myself as a distant relative. Claire was so bright, so beautiful. Her voice broke slightly. She was suffering in that house. Margaret Wilson was kind enough, but she worked long hours. And Jeffrey, he was struggling with his own demons, drinking too much. I wanted to help her. So you showed her the tunnels, Thomas said. Gave her an escape route. Elaine nodded. I never meant for things to go so wrong. When Claire told me about my father, about what he was doing to her, I confronted him, threatened to expose him to the entire town. But he was the police chief, Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice. No one would believe you over him. Exactly. Elaine's hand tightened on the revolver. He said he'd take care of it, make sure Claire understood the importance of keeping quiet. Her eyes took on a distant, haunted quality. I never imagined he would. Kill her, Thomas finished quietly. Your father killed your daughter. Tears streamed down Elaine's weathered face now, gleaming in the flashlight's beam. He didn't mean to. That's what he told me afterward. Said she fought back, fell and hit her head, said it was an accident. Her voice hardened. But he made sure Jeffrey Wilson took the blame, used his position to plant evidence, steer the investigation. His own son helped him, our current Sheriff Hanson, without even knowing what he was covering up. Thomas felt sick. The pieces were falling into place, the hasty investigation, the convenient suspect, the missing body. Where is she? Elaine. Where did he put Claire's body? Elaine's gaze shifted to the floor beneath their feet. Where do you think the church elders used to bury their secrets, Detective Richardson? The tunnels weren't just for maintenance. The implication struck Thomas like a physical blow. They were standing above Claire's unmarked grave. All these years, Sarah whispered, horrified. You've been living across the street, watching over her. Waiting, Elaine corrected, raising the revolver until it pointed squarely at Thomas's chest. Waiting for the right moment to make sure everyone responsible paid for what happened to my little girl. The silence that followed Elaine's declaration was absolute, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and Scout's low, continuous growl. Thomas kept his body positioned between the gun and his family, mind racing through tactical options. The distance to Elaine was too great to risk rushing her, especially with Sarah and Lily so exposed. Your father is dead, Elaine, Thomas said carefully. He died 5 years ago. Sheriff Hanson told me himself. Yes, Elaine replied, her voice hollow. Pancreatic cancer. He suffered at the end. Not enough, but it was something. Her hand trembled slightly, the gun wavering. But Mike Jr. is still here, still benefiting from his father's reputation, still protecting the family name. Mike doesn't know the truth, Thomas countered. You said it yourself, he was just following his father's lead during the investigation. He knew enough, Elaine spat. He knew Jeffrey Wilson didn't fit the evidence. He knew the timeline was wrong. But he went along with it because that's what his father wanted. Her eyes narrowed. The Hansons have always protected their own, just like they're doing now, with Jeffrey's parole hearing. Understanding dawned on Thomas. Sheriff Hanson has been fighting Wilson's parole, not to keep a killer locked up, but to keep the case buried. 15 years, Elaine said, her voice breaking. 15 years that innocent man has spent in prison while my father lived free, respected, mourned by the entire town when he died. She gestured with the gun toward Claire's metal box, which Sarah still clutched tightly against her chest. That letter would have changed everything if it had been found back then. It can still change things, Sarah said gently, taking a cautious step forward despite Thomas's attempt to keep her behind him. Claire's letter. Your testimony, we can set the record straight. Get justice for Claire and for Jeffrey Wilson. Elaine laughed, a brittle sound that echoed in the garage. Justice? There's no justice for a child murdered by the very person sworn to protect her. There's no justice for a mother who wasn't allowed to claim her own daughter, even in death. Her finger tightened on the trigger. There's only vengeance now. Vengeance against who? Elaine, Thomas asked, desperately trying to reach the woman behind the weapon. The troopers upstairs. They had nothing to do with this. My family. We're trying to help Claire. Claire doesn't need help anymore, Elaine replied, her voice suddenly distant. She needs company. The implication sent a chill through Thomas. Elaine wasn't just here for revenge. She was planning a murder-suicide, with his family as collateral damage. Claire wouldn't want this, he said firmly. She wrote that letter because she wanted the truth to come out, not for more people to die. Something flickered in Elaine's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a moment of clarity. But before she could respond, a new voice spoke from the tunnel entrance behind them. He's right. Elaine. Sheriff Mike Hanson, Jr. stood in the doorway, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. His uniform was disheveled, his face streaked with rain and what looked like blood from a cut above his eye. Behind him, Thomas could just make out one of the state troopers, weapon drawn but held at a careful angle. The troopers told me what you found. Hanson continued, his voice steady despite the gun now pointed in his direction. Claire's letter. The badge pin with my father's hair. He took a tentative step forward. I didn't know. Elaine, I swear to God, I didn't know what he did to her. You helped him frame an innocent man, Elaine accused, though Thomas noted her hand was shaking more visibly now. I believed my father, Hanson replied simply. I was 25, just out of the academy. He was the chief, my hero. When he said Wilson was guilty, I never questioned it. His voice thickened with emotion. That's on me. I have to live with that. But this, he gestured toward Thomas's family, this won't bring Claire back. Nothing will bring her back, Elaine whispered, tears streaming freely down her face now. No, Hanson agreed, taking another careful step forward. But we can honor her by telling the truth. All of it. He looked directly at Thomas. I came to your house tonight because I found something in my father's old files, something he'd hidden away. He reached slowly into his pocket, removing a small notebook. His private journal. He documented everything. Thomas. Not just what he did to Claire, but where he buried her. Scout, who had maintained his protective stance in front of Lily, suddenly whined and pawed at the dirt floor. The dog's behavior shifted from defensive to the alert posture Thomas recognized from his search and rescue days. Scout was indicating a find. "She's here, isn't she?" Thomas asked quietly. "Directly beneath us." Hansen nodded grimly. "According to my father's notes. Yes. In the oldest section of the tunnels, sealed behind a false wall he constructed himself." He turned his attention back to Elaine. "I was coming to tell you what I'd found, to finally do right by Claire. That's when I saw the state police arriving and knew something had happened." Elaine's resolve seemed to waver, the gun lowering slightly. "You expect me to believe you suddenly grew a conscience after 15 years?" "Not suddenly," Hansen replied. "I've had doubts for years, cases that didn't add up, inconsistencies in the evidence against Wilson, but I trusted my father's judgment over my own." He held up the notebook. "Until I found this last week, hidden in a compartment in his old desk when I was cleaning out the garage." The state trooper behind Hansen spoke up. "Ma'am, please put down the weapon. We can work through this together, but I need you to disarm first." For a long, tense moment, Elaine stood frozen, the revolver still pointed vaguely in their direction. Then, with a shuddering sigh, she lowered it to her side. "I just wanted her to rest in peace," she said, her voice barely audible. "To be acknowledged, to be found. And now she will be," Sarah said gently, still clutching Claire's metal box. "Because of you, Elaine. Because you never gave up on her." The tension in the room dissipated like air from a punctured balloon. The trooper moved swiftly to secure Elaine's weapon, though he treated her with surprising gentleness, more like a victim than a suspect. Sheriff Hansen approached Thomas, his expression a complex mixture of shame and relief. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything." Thomas nodded, not quite ready to offer forgiveness, but acknowledging the man's apparent remorse. "What happens now?" "We do this by the book," Hansen replied firmly. "State police take over the investigation completely. We recover Claire's remains properly, with full forensic documentation, and then—" he swallowed hard. "Then I resign and face whatever consequences come my way for my part in all this." The second trooper appeared at the tunnel entrance, reporting that the storm had temporarily abated and paramedics were on scene to treat Scout's injury, as if understanding he was being discussed. The golden retriever finally relaxed his protective stance, leaning heavily against Lily's side as the adrenaline of the moment faded, revealing the pain of his wound. "He needs a vet," Lily said anxiously, stroking Scout's golden head. "He got hurt protecting us. We'll get him taken care of right away," Thomas promised, kneeling to examine the dog's shoulder again. The bleeding had slowed, but Scout's eyes were dulled with pain, his usual alertness dimmed by exhaustion. Thomas felt a surge of gratitude toward the animal who had, from the very beginning, tried to communicate what he'd sensed about this house and its secrets. As they prepared to leave the garage, Elaine suddenly spoke again, her voice steadier now. "There's something else you should know," she said, looking directly at Sheriff Hansen. "Something not even your father knew." Hansen turned to her questioningly. "Claire wasn't just his victim," Elaine continued. "She was his granddaughter." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Hansen staggered slightly, his face draining of color. "What are you saying?" "When I got pregnant at 16, Elaine explained, her voice curiously devoid of emotion now. "I never told my father who the baby's father was. I couldn't. It was Matthew Wilson Jeffrey's older brother, who was 22 and married at the time." She laughed bitterly. "The scandal would have destroyed both our families, so I kept quiet. My father arranged the private adoption, never knowing he was sending his own granddaughter to live with her paternal uncle. And Claire ended up back in her biological father's family," Sarah murmured, horrified. "Without anyone knowing the connection. Matthew died in a car accident when Claire was 3, Elaine continued. Jeffrey married Margaret and adopted Claire, officially. No one ever knew the truth except me and Matthew." Her eyes fixed on Hanson with terrible intensity. "Your father abused and killed his own granddaughter, Mike, and then he framed her adoptive father for it. That's the legacy of the great Chief Hanson." The sheriff seemed to age 10 years in as many seconds, his shoulders slumping under the weight of this final revelation. "I'll make it right," he said eventually, his voice barely audible. "Whatever it takes, I'll make it right." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of official statements, medical examinations, and careful excavation. The state police brought in a forensic archaeology team to recover Claire's remains, treating the site with the solemnity it deserved. Scout underwent surgery at the local veterinary clinic to clean and close his wound, emerging groggy but stable. Thomas and Sarah gave their statements multiple times, describing everything from their discovery of Claire's letter to the confrontation with Elaine. Lily, too, spoke to a specially trained child interviewer, explaining in her direct way how Claire had showed her the special hiding place and how Scout had tried to protect her from the room until they found what Claire wanted them to find. The media descended on Pinewood like a second storm, but the state police maintained a tight perimeter around the old church, protecting the Richardson family from the worst of the intrusion. Sheriff Hanson, true to his word, submitted his resignation and provided a complete confession of his unwitting role in his father's cover-up. Elaine was taken into custody but treated more as a material witness than a criminal. Her attorney, provided by the state, was optimistic that the circumstances and her cooperation would lead to leniency. On the third day, as Thomas sat beside Scout's bed at the veterinary clinic, gently stroking the dog's ears while he recovered, his phone rang. It was the lead state investigator. "We've confirmed it," the investigator said without preamble. "DNA testing matches the remains to the samples provided by Elaine Winters. It's definitely Claire Wilson, and the forensic evidence supports everything in Chief Hanson's journal, blunt force trauma to the back of the head, consistent with a fall against a hard surface." "And Jeffrey Wilson?" Thomas asked, thinking of the man who had spent 15 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. "Judge has ordered his immediate release," the investigator replied. "The prosecutor's office is formally apologizing and initiating compensation proceedings. He should be out by tomorrow." After hanging up, Thomas sat in silence, watching Scout's chest rise and fall with each steady breath. The dog had known something was wrong from the moment they entered the house. He had tried, in the only way he could, to protect them from a tragedy that had happened long before they arrived. "You did good, boy," Thomas whispered, leaning close to Scout's ear. "You found her. You can rest now." Scout's tail thumped weakly against the bed, his brown eyes opening to meet Thomas's gaze. In that moment of connection, Thomas felt something shift inside him. The detective who had failed to solve his last case had finally found resolution, guided by the instincts of a dog who understood more than any human had given him credit for. Later that evening, when Thomas returned home with Scout carefully settled in the back seat of their car, he found Sarah sitting on the porch steps, waiting for him. "The state police are finishing up," she said as he sat beside her. "They've sealed the tunnels permanently after recovering everything they needed." She hesitated, then added, "They found something else down there. Thomas. Something Chief Hansen documented in his journal." "What?" "A police badge. The real one. Not the pin replica Claire had. Apparently, he buried it with her some twisted form of acknowledgement or guilt." Sarah shook her head. There was also a small box containing jewelry and photographs. Mementos Elaine had given Claire during their secret meetings. Thomas absorbed this information silently, watching as Lily played with her stuffed animals in the front yard, seemingly untouched by the horror that had unfolded around her. Children were remarkably resilient, he knew, but he and Sarah would need to watch carefully for delayed reactions. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, echoing his earlier question to Sheriff Hansen. "Do we stay? After everything that's happened here?" Thomas considered the question seriously. The house that had seemed like such a bargain now carried the weight of tragedy and painful revelations. But it had also been the site of long-delayed justice, of truth finally coming to light. "I think," he said slowly, "that depends on what Scout thinks." As if hearing his name, the golden retriever lifted his head from his comfortable position in the car, his gaze steady and clear despite the painkillers in his system. For the first time since they'd moved in, the dog's posture held no tension, no anxiety. "I think he's saying this place is finally at peace," Thomas said quietly. "And maybe we can be too." 1 month later, the Richardson family gathered in their living room, surrounded by half-packed moving boxes and the controlled chaos that accompanied any relocation. Though they had initially considered staying in the converted church, the constant stream of curious onlookers and occasional reporters had made normal life impossible. More importantly, Sarah had accepted a position with the state's Child Advocacy Center in Portland work that would allow her to help children who, like Claire, needed someone to believe their stories. "Are you sure we have room for all these books?" Thomas asked, sealing yet another box labeled Thomas, Office. "We'll make room," Sarah replied, the certainty in her voice leaving no room for argument. "Some things are worth keeping, no matter what." Among those things was Claire's metal box, which now sat on their mantelpiece. After the investigation concluded, the state police had returned it to them as a courtesy. Though its contents, the letter, the badge pin, and Claire's diary remained in evidence storage, the box itself stood as a reminder of the truth they had helped uncover. Scout lounged on his bed by the fireplace, his shoulder almost fully healed. The veterinarian had warned that he might always have a slight limp, especially in cold weather, but the golden retriever showed no signs of being troubled by it. If anything, the events of the past month seemed to have lightened something in the dog's demeanor. His vigilance remained, but the anxiety that had plagued him since their arrival had disappeared entirely. "When is Mr. Wilson coming?" Lily asked, carefully wrapping her collection of polished stones in tissue paper before placing them in a small container. "Any minute now," Thomas answered, checking his watch. Jeffrey Wilson had been released from prison 3 weeks earlier. his conviction overturned and his record expunged. The media had swarmed around him initially, hungry for statements about his wrongful conviction. But Wilson had surprised everyone by declining most interviews, saying only that he wanted to reclaim the quiet life that had been stolen from him. His first act as a free man had been to visit Claire's newly established grave in the Pinewood Cemetery, where her remains had been properly interred following the completion of the forensic examination. His second had been to contact Thomas and Sarah, asking if he might visit them before they left town. The doorbell rang, and Scout raised his head alertly, but without alarm. Thomas opened the door to find Jeffrey Wilson standing on their porch, looking much older than his 55 years. Prison had etched deep lines into his face and threaded his dark hair with gray, but his eyes held a clear, steady light that spoke of hard-won peace. "Mr. Richardson," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for—" Thomas shook the offered hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of 15 years of prison labor. "Please, call me Thomas, and come in my family's looking forward to meeting you." Wilson stepped inside, his gaze traveling over the half-packed living room before settling on Scout, who had risen to greet him with a gentle wag of his tail. "So, this is the famous Scout," Wilson said, kneeling carefully to offer his hand to the dog. "The hero of the hour." Scout sniffed Wilson's hand thoroughly before giving it an approving lick, then returned to his bed, apparently satisfied with his assessment of their visitor. Sarah emerged from the kitchen with a tray of coffee and cookies, Lily trailing behind her with solemn curiosity. Introductions were made, and they settled around the living room, navigating the maze of boxes. "I won't take much of your time," Wilson said after accepting a cup of coffee. "I just wanted to thank you in person. What you discovered, what your dog discovered." He nodded toward Scout. "It gave me back my life." "We're just sorry it took 15 years, Sarah replied quietly. Wilson nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than bitter. 15 years is a long time, but not as long as forever, which is how long I expected to be labeled a murderer. He set his cup down carefully. I've had a lot of time to think about Claire, about what happened to her, about how many adults failed to protect her, myself included. You didn't know, Thomas said. No. But I should have seen something, Wilson insisted. There were signs, changes in her behavior, her reluctance to spend time with certain people. I was too wrapped up in my own problems to notice. He shook his head. That's why I'm here. Actually, to tell you what I plan to do with my second chance. From his pocket, Wilson withdrew a folded piece of paper, which he handed to Thomas. It was a brochure for a nonprofit organization called Claire's Voice, dedicated to providing advocacy and support for child victims of abuse, particularly in small communities where reporting such crimes could be especially difficult. The state settlement will fund it, Wilson explained. I'm working with child protection experts to develop training programs for teachers, counselors, anyone who works with children. We want to make sure what happened to Claire never happens to another child. That's wonderful, Sarah said, genuine admiration in her voice. If you ever need a child psychologist to consult, I'd be honored to help. Wilson smiled, perhaps his first genuine smile in 15 years. I was hoping you'd say that. Lily, who had been quietly observing the adults' conversation, suddenly spoke up. Claire would like that. She wanted to help other kids, too. Wilson's expression softened as he looked at the little girl. "Did she tell you that—" Lily nodded solemnly. "Before she left, she said she was going to a better place, but she wanted to make sure this place was better too." An understanding silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of Scout shifting position on his bed. Thomas exchanged a glance with Sarah, who gave him a small nod. They had discussed this moment, knowing it might come. "Mr. Wilson," Thomas said, reaching for the empty box on the mantelpiece. "We thought you might want to have this. It belonged to Claire." Wilson accepted the metal box with trembling hands, running his fingers over its tarnished surface. "Her treasure box," he whispered. "She was always collecting little things, pretty rocks, feathers, anything that caught her eye." He looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you. This means more than I can say." As Wilson prepared to leave an hour later, he paused at the door, turning back to the family that had changed his life. "Will you be all right after everything that's happened here?" Thomas glanced at Sarah and Lily, then down at Scout, who had positioned himself, as always, protectively close to the little girl. "We will," he said with certainty. "Some scars will remain, but they'll heal, and we'll never forget what we learned here about justice, about truth, and about listening when someone tries to tell you something important, even if they can't use words." Wilson nodded in understanding, his gaze falling on Scout. "The wisest voices sometimes don't speak at all." After Wilson left, the family returned to their packing, working together in companionable silence, as afternoon sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting patterns of blue and gold across the floor. That evening, as Thomas finished sealing the last box in the office Claire's room, he noticed Scout standing in the doorway, watching him with calm, intelligent eyes. "It's okay now, boy," Thomas said quietly. "You did good. You can come in." For the first time since they'd moved into the house, Scout entered the room willingly, circling it once before settling on the bare floor with a contented sigh. Thomas sat beside him, scratching behind the dog's ears as they both gazed at the now repaired wall that had hidden Claire's final message for so long. "Some things can't stay buried forever," Thomas murmured, as much to himself as to Scout. "The truth finds its way to the light, one way or another." Scout rested his head on Thomas's knee in silent agreement, his mission finally complete. In 3 days, they would leave this house and its ghosts behind, but they would carry forward its lessons about listening to the silent warnings, about the courage it takes to uncover painful truths, and about the healing that can only begin when those truths are finally faced. Outside, the first stars appeared in the evening sky, shining down on Pinewood, a town forever changed by a child's hidden letter, and a dog who wouldn't let a little girl near a room until the time was right. In our quiet moments, we often wonder if anyone would notice the truths we leave behind. The story of Scout, the loyal golden retriever who stood guard over a forgotten child's final message, reminds us that some bonds transcend time and silence. Like many of you who've stood watch over your own families through decades of change, Scout knew that protection sometimes means preventing harm, and other times means bringing painful truths to light when the moment is finally right. Perhaps you've been that guardian in your own family, the one who remembers, who preserves the stories others have forgotten, who knows when to protect and when to reveal. The Richardson family's journey touches something deep within us all. Our fear of failing those who depend on us, our hope that wrongs from the past can still be made right, and our faith that even after 15 years, justice delayed need not be justice denied. As we